church benches and into the trenches. Let's make a righteous ruckus.
Boom! Welcome back to this week's episode, welcome to this week's episode of the Righteous Ruckus podcast. I am once again your humble host, Riley Lowe. And today I want to get into something we're going to talk about was Jonah. Remember, Jonah gets swallowed by the whale, the prophet. You know, he was running from God, gets swallowed up by the fish, and then gets spit back out. Now, a question for you, something that, growing up, I always just assumed the answer to this, but was Jonah dead or alive when he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days? Was he dead or alive? Question, right? I know everybody's going, well, yeah, he was alive, duh. But let's talk about it. It's everything we've always been assumed and been shown that. So let's talk about it. I want to talk about that and also tie that into Jesus, right? And you got to kind of use, what the Bible is the best commentary on the Bible, right? I've heard it said that. And so you got to kind of use that. Now, I do want to give a shout out before I get into this. There was a video posted on social media by a friend and a woman that goes to church, Elizabeth, with us, right? And I recently became friends with her on a social media platform, and I immediately saw a video that triggered this on there. So it's great. We are so blessed to be in a time when you get a bunch of, it's a blessing and a curse, right? It's a double-edged sword where you get ideas, right? So many ideas. There's so much knowledge, so much ideas, so many thought things out there about theology and about the world and everything, right? But you have to filter it all through the Bible, and that's why we're going to the Bible to filter this out and to connect the dots, okay? So I think it's really gonna make you think on this. And also, man, I'd love to hear if you've got an opposite opinion or a different opinion or a better explanation, because I guarantee you I am not the best person at explaining this thing. And probably most things that I talk about, I'm not the best person at explaining things. So I really would solicit advice and any further knowledge on the subject. Correct me if I'm wrong. Let's hear it. Let's talk about it. Man, I love discussing these ideas, and I love thought exercises regarding all these biblical things. So we're going to get right into the book of Jonah, right? Like I told you, if you haven't read Jonah, I'm sure Jonah's probably, when you talk about, the memorable things or things that they make like kids videos and illustrations out of, you're going to have Jonah, you're going to have David and Goliath. It's probably right up there with one of those that everybody is familiar with Jonah. And actually it's probably one of the top 5 excuses that atheists will use for not believing would be, you really believe that a guy was in the belly of a fish, or even if it was a whale, for 3 days and 3 nights? Really? You think that? Well, let's talk about this, okay? Now, like I said, I'm completely open-minded. I just want to talk about it. Let's just talk about it. And I think we'll probably both learn some things going through this. So let's look at Jonah chapter 2, right? So Jonah was on the ship, and there was a big storm, and the other guys on the ship figured out that Jonah was that the reason why they were in this storm and about to sink was because Jonah was running from God. And Jonah's like, dude, just throw me off. Just throw me in the ocean. I'm as good as dead anyway. Let's get it over with. And so, of course, I'm paraphrasing there. So anyway, so they throw Jonah off, and when he hits the water, he is eaten by a giant fish, right? The Bible calls it a fish. Could have been a whale. Could have been who knows what, right? Could have been something that doesn't exist today. Could have been a supernatural fish, right? So here's in Jonah chapter 2, verse 1. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord in his God from the fish's belly, And he said, so he just got eaten by a fish. And he's praying. Quote, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. God answers him. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried. What is Sheol? Sheol is the underworld. Sheol is not heaven, right? It can be, you could identify it with hell. I cried out from, it really just means the underworld though. I cried out of the belly of Sheol I cried. And I want to preface this. This is the New King James Version. I read a lot out of the NIV just because of the ease of reading. It is not the one to go to with what this we're discussing here because it does not do this story justice. I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice, talking about God. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas. Heart of the seas, right? He's into the middle of the ocean. And the floods surrounded me. So a lot of times it's depicted as he's always in this belly of the whale, and he's just sitting there twiddling his thumbs because he's like all this air around him. No, the floods surrounded me. All your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight. Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. In other words, he's looking forward to God. He's looking to God. He's thinking about God. He's dwelling on God, right? Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The waters surrounded me, even to my soul. The souls of your innermost being. It seems to me like he's drowning here. Sounds like he's drowning here. The deep closed around me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the moorings of the mountains. In other words, the bottom of the ocean. So this could have been, sperm whales. They go down deep. People know that. The earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Bars, that almost sounds like a prison, but it also sounds like someplace you're not getting out of. You're not getting out of there, right? You'll be there. It even says that the earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Also keep in mind that the ancient or the early Jewish thought process is that when you die, it's like the earth is swallowing you up. I don't know. I think maybe that goes back to what was it in Exodus, where the tribe of Korah, right? The earth literally like opens up and swallows them. I think maybe that's what that stems from. But the earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Yet you have brought up my life from the pit. So if you are brought up from the pit, then you would have had to been down in the pit, right? Which to me sounds like he died. He says, O Lord my God, when my soul fainted within me, died, right? I remembered the Lord. In other words, as he's dying, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer went up to you into your holy temple. So he's essentially saying the same thing twice. He's saying the same series of events twice in two little bit different ways. So this is not like, see, we struggle because we like to have linear thinking. And we think that, oh, well, this must have happened after what he said before. No, he's just reiterating the same thing in a slightly different way from a little bit different angle. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer went up to you into your holy temple. Those who regard worthless idols forsake their own mercy, but I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay what I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. So he's actually pleading for salvation. He's praying for salvation. And remember, it said there in the beginning, we go back up to verse 2, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Where's the answer? The answer is here at the end in verse 10. So the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Okay? So let's look. We can actually preface this a little bit. I believe in Jonah 1. Yes, in Jonah 1:17, this was when he was getting ready to when he got thrown off. It says, now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. So the Lord had set this in motion. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, right? So that's how long he was in the fish before it vomited him up. So it's often been described and depicted as he's hanging out in the belly of this whale, usually is how it's depicted. And he's hanging out and he's saying, God, please get me out of here. If there's any way possible, just help me get out of here. Like that's where he's at. But it says, man, it says, my soul fainted within me. The waters, the floods surrounded me. The water surrounded me even to my soul. The deep closed around me. You brought my life up from the pit. In other words, he was in the pit. The earth and its bars closed behind me forever. It sounds like he's dead, right? It sounds like he's dead. Now, I know you're, what do they call that? It's not I'm trying to remember the psychological term where you remember something or you're fighting against your bias, right? You're fighting against your preconceived notions of what the story is. And I know for me, the first time I heard this, I was like, what? No, he didn't die. He's there, right? Okay, so that concludes that story in Jonah. Now, Jesus references Jonah, right? Jesus references Jonah. Listen to this. The scribes and Pharisees are asking for a sign. This is in Matthew 12, and let's start in 38. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. Perform a magic trick to show who you are. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Jonah, the sign of Jonah. What does that mean? He goes on in verse 40. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man, he's talking about himself, be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up in the judgment and with this generation and condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And indeed, a greater than Jonah is here. In other words, saying, I'm greater than Jonah. The queen of the south will rise up in its judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear wisdom of Solomon. And indeed, a greater than Solomon is here. He's saying he's better than Solomon. He's better than Jonah. And you guys aren't listening. You guys are just wanting me to do signs, right? He's saying, this is the sign I'm going to give you. 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And remember, he says, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So if he's foreshadowing him being 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, right? Heart of the earth, in the tomb. His soul being not there, right? Not in a body. He's in what we know that Jesus died. And he's saying this is just like Jonah. Just like Jonah was in a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, his body was, my body is going to be in a tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. That's what he's saying, right? That is what he's saying. And just like, and he's equivocating the death, burial, and resurrection with Jonah. It's an analogy, if you will, right? So what he's saying is that Jonah died, was dead for 3 days and 3 nights. Then God commanded the fish to spit him out on dry land. What did he look like? He obviously didn't look like a zombie and hadn't been rotten in a fish's gut for 3 days and 3 nights. He obviously had some sort of not a resurrected body, but yes, a resurrected body, but not like the not a glorified body like Jesus received, because Jesus was greater. He even says that he's greater than Jonah. He's greater than Solomon. But what he's saying is, it's kind of like Lazarus, right? Lazarus was dead for 4 days in the tomb, and before Jesus resurrected him. Now, he didn't come out and smell like what they thought he would smell like and was all rotten because he'd been in there and bloated and whatever because he'd been in there for 4 days. No, he looked like he'd come out there like a normal dude, right? So Jonah was able to do that, and Jesus was able to do that. So he also says again to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, let's see here. This is in Matthew 16, verse 1. When the Pharisees and Sadducees came and testing him asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. Now here's the thing. He says the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, I discussed this with my youngest brother here a week or so ago, whenever it was, right? When I really got to thinking about this, and we were piecing this together and really discussing it, and the way I was explaining it to him, and as we were discussing it, was that it's interesting that these Pharisees and Sadducees, especially in this Matthew 16 version, they're not asking, what do you mean? Right? They're not asking, what do you mean, the prophet Jonah. They knew that Jonah was dead. And why do I make that assumption? Because I'm using somewhat deductive reasoning here, but hear me out. So remember when Jesus had died and was buried, right? Buried in the tomb. Remember, that was a Pharisee or Sadducees at Joseph of Arimathea, I think was his name. I might be wrong on that. But so that guy was a closet believer, right? He had believed, but he didn't want to be public about it. That's why he donated that tomb for Jesus to be buried in, because he was a believer. And so, but also remember, I'm sure there was a big discussion, and what did they say? They said his followers believe that he will be resurrected after 3 days. So we need to go and have them put the Roman guards in front of this tomb and seal it so that they don't steal the body and make it look like he was resurrected, right? They knew that he would be resurrected, that he had claimed to be resurrected after 3 days. And part of the reason why they did believe that is because what I read to you in Matthew 12, when he said to them, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. He told them, I'm going to be dead for 3 days and 3 nights. Right? So they knew that. They knew that what the disciples believed, that he would be resurrected, lined up with what Jesus himself had told these guys. And they knew that it meant that when he talked about Jonah, they were not thinking of it as Jonah in the belly of a whale sitting there alive. They didn't think that we're going to kill Jesus, but he's not going to be really dead, and we're going to put him in the tomb, and he's going to be sitting in there for 3 days and 3 nights until we check on him, and turns out there's a live dude in there, and he just comes walking out. No, that's not what they were expecting. They were expecting him to die, because he used this story of Jonah. I think, like I said, deductive reasoning here. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think that that when he said that, they knew that Jonah had died. They didn't think of it as Jonah not being dead and coming back to life. They thought Jonah had died and come back to life. And this guy's saying he's going to die and just as Jonah come back to life. So they're piecing that together with what they heard the disciples talk about. And they're saying this guy is promising to come back. We've got to, why else would you? I mean, I think that contributes to them going to all out lengths to try to get this tomb guarded because their way of life was being threatened. And if he did come back to life, they're thinking surely not, but man, I don't know. He said just like Jonah, and we know what happened with Jonah. He come back to life, right? That's what that I think was part of their thought process. So I'm extrapolating there, right? That's not written in the Bible anywhere, but it's a thought exercise. But I truly think that Jonah was dead and Jonah came back to life. And that's why Jesus used that as an illustration for that. And that's also why that happened to Jonah, so that Jesus could use that example that was familiar with all the people, all the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, I'm going to open up a whole nother can of worms here. Let me check the time. Okay. I'm gonna stop here, and then to leave you a cliffhanger, we're gonna go into a little bit. So Jonah, I think he was dead in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And we're going to see how that can also help tie in to 1 Peter 3:19. 1 Peter 3:19. If you read that, by whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison. We're going to talk about that next time. So there's something to think about. Until next week. God bless you.